Support for this program was made possible by Filio by LaSaF, who is committed to delivering animal health and performance solutions based on live yeast, bacteria, and yeast products that demonstrate improvements in digestibility, enhanced immune response, and support animal welfare. For more information, go to thecwtgroup.com and their information is in the Business Resource Center. One of the things that dairymen hate to see on their milk check is a negative Ppd. Here to discuss a program titled The Curse of the Negative Ppd is Dr. Lawrence Jones from Farm Institute. When the June milk checks came, farms saw a significant negative Ppd if they were in a multiple component federal order. This particular check is from the Northeast Federal Order and had a negative Ppd of $5.38. There's a lot of discussion in the popular press as to what caused this negative Ppd, and I'd like to look at three of these, which include rising prices, the spread between 3 and 4, and the lower utilization of high-priced milk. Let's first remind ourselves how prices get set. And so the USDA takes three things into a computational program and comes out with the uniform price and the Ppd. They start with the advanced prices, which are basically set for class 1, the class and component prices, and then the utilization of milk. So it is these three components which go into the adding machine and then will give us back a uniform price and a Ppd. The most important part is the uniform price. That is the amount of milk that is sold in the order and the amount of money that is collected from it. Then when we subtract the class 3 price from it, we get the Ppd, which is basically, you can think of mathematically as an error term, or it's used to balance the equation. So on this check, if we look at the butter, fat, protein, other solids, all those come together is the statistical uniform price. Then the actual components are used to pay out the class 3 price, and then the difference between the class 3 and the statistical uniform price is the Ppd. The advanced prices were set on May 20th, 2020 and set a class 1 price for the Northeast at $14.67. If we look graphically as to when these advanced prices were set, which is in the early part of May, and then we follow this blue line as to how the price for June milk changed on the mercantile exchange, we see that there was quite a bit of difference from the time period as to when that was actually announced versus the final numbers that were announced right around $21.04 for class 3. So if we look at exactly what happened, the advanced prices were set for butter, non-fat dry milk, cheese and whey for the weeks ending 5/9 and 5/16, and the class and component numbers were set for the 4 weeks in June. And if we see what happened is the non-fat dry milk came up, but more importantly, cheese came up significantly from $1.18 to $2.15, and whey went down just a little bit. As a consequence of this, we ended up with a statistical uniform price of $16.44 and a class 3 of $21.04, and since the class 3 was higher than the statistical uniform price, it had to have a negative $4.60 Ppd. The way we get that uniform price is we look at the different prices for the different classes. So for example, class 1 was $14.67 and there was 28% utilization, whereas class 3 was $21.04 with a 28% utilization. So weighted average of this gives us the $16.44. We know the class 3 price. We have to balance the equation, so it's a minus 460 Ppd. This graph may help display this. So where we have the $16.44, there's a big difference between the class 3 and the PPD has to make up that difference. So the question that I asked is, what if we'd had these high prices all the time as opposed to having the prices rise? So we had exactly the same butter, non-fat dry milk, cheese and whey during the advanced prices as we had during the actual classic component announcements. So if we did that, we end up with a statistical uniform price, which is $18.25, and a PPD, which is minus $2.79. So in fact, our PPD would have risen by $1.81. So $1.81 of this negative PPD was the fact that prices were much lower during the advanced period than during the actual payment period. So the one thing that this reminds us is that negative PPDs are associated with rising prices. Anytime you get prices that are rising, you will have negative PPDs, and even though people look at those as a bad thing, they're actually indicative of good prices to come. Now, the other thing that is discussed quite a bit is the difference between Class 3 and Class 4. And there's arguments in the popular press that it is this difference that created a huge amount of the difference in the PPD. So let's look at this. These are our actual component numbers that were released by USDA that gave us a 2104 Class 3 and a 1290 Class 4. So that's a huge difference. And that gave us a Class 1 skim price of $11.58 because we take the average of the skim prices, add 74 cents to get the Class 1 skim price. So let's do a little simulation where we take the non-fat dry milk and raise it from the 91 cents to $1.31. That's about the only way you can get Class 4 to come up. And we took cheese from $2.15 down to $1.73. So that put my Class 3 at $16.36 and my Class 4 at $16.33. So very similar to each other. And that ended up with a Class 1 skim price of $10.93. So when we run this through the USDA calculations, we get a statistical uniform price of $18.25. We get a PPD of a positive $1.89, and we get a Class 3 of $16.36. So there's no doubt that having Class 3 and Class 4 closer to each other will give us a much better PPD, but in fact, it did not help overall milk price. So when we had a big difference, we had an $18.25 statistical uniform price, a very good Class 3, which ended up with a negative PPD. But when we brought them closer together, we ended up exactly the same statistical uniform price, a lower Class 3, and a positive PPD. Now, if you are in Wisconsin and you have a very high Class 3 utilization, you would much prefer to have this situation where Class 3 is very high and a negative PPD versus the situation where Class 3 is a little lower and a positive PPD. So the conclusion from this is that changing the spread between 3 and 4 will change the PPD, but not necessarily the statistical uniform price. So all the discussion in the popular press about one of the things causing a significant problem is the fact that 3 and 4 are different in prices. It doesn't actually change the income on the dairy, but it will change the distribution as to whether it comes out in components or in the PPD. One other thing that is worth discussing is what happens if you have a significant change in the utilization of milk. In this example, we had expectations of 28% Class 3, but we ended up with just 18.5% Class 3. So without changing the prices at all, and without changing the price for fat, protein, and other solids, this will actually lower the PPD by about 65 cents. And the way that this happened in the Federal Order 1 is this is what was called depooling milk. And so they took the Class 3 milk, which was the very high price at $21.04, they depooled it, which changed this utilization, and consequently it lowered the PPD by 65 cents. Interestingly enough, the farm should get this money back, but it may not be evenly distributed because not all co-ops may have depooled at the same rate. If you're in a co-op that did significant depooling, you may get more back. If you're in a co-op that did absolutely no depooling, then you'll get none of this 65 cents back. So one of my arguments is we should actually just forget about PPD and only focus on statistical uniform price. PPDs are an artifact, and it only comes about for the fact that we pay out the components based on a class 3 basis. So a lot of times the difference in the statistical uniform price will be very small, but we'll actually move money between the components in the PPD. But again, what's important to the dairyman is the statistical uniform price, which is the total price paid for the milk. If you find this program informative, it is being released through a website called the CWT Group, and there are numerous programs that get put on that for milk pricing with regular updates as to what's going on in the market. So you go to thecwtgroup.com, become a member of the website, and then subscribe to the milk price and pricing videos. Thank you for watching this program. This is Dr. Lawrence Jones from Farm Institute.